Thank you, Mishka, for such a kind introduction. And thanks all of you for having me here today. Is that better?
A little bit better, Okay, do that too close? Okay, there you go.
So thanks again for having me. I think this is an incredibly important event. I recognize Joy out there. Sorry. And hopefully through my talk it will be evident why I think it's so important to have events like this and for the environmental community to work together with faith communities. Because I think we both excel at certain things and we both need each other to be fully effective and realize the changes that we need to see. So my goal today is to share some lessons from my own personal experience in environmental advocacy and coalitions, particularly around climate change, and perhaps to start a discussion by suggesting a few ways that these lessons might be applied to opportunities for us to work together with faith and environmental groups in the future. So for the past 4 years or so, I've been working on climate change policy at the Pembina Institute. We're a national sustainable energy think tank. An advocacy organization. So most of my work involves very nerdy and boring things, but hopefully useful to others. But through that, I had the opportunity to work with a number of coalitions, particularly the Climate Action Network, which I see a number of representatives from different groups here today. That's a group that brings together over 50 different organizations from across the environmental community, as well as labor, faith, Aboriginal groups, and youth groups. And it's a great opportunity for these different groups to work together and be able to focus on what each group does best and really play to our strengths while keeping some overall cohesion and common direction. So like I mentioned, Pembina's work tends to be quite technical and aimed at policymakers. Other groups are much better at engaging their membership or working with the public to create pressure and consensus to move forward on things. So together we're able to keep all of this complementary, as we try to. So in the background of my work over the past 2 years, there's been a big change in public views on climate change. Perhaps not how people see the issue, but at least in terms of how they prioritize it. And I think it's gone from being a top-of-mind priority for people and therefore for policymakers to something that's more of a second-tier, nice-to-have issue. At least that's how it's perceived by politicians. As a consequence, the federal government has abandoned the idea of having a cohesive, sensible approach to climate change and some sort of a national plan, and framing sensible policy as the enemy of jobs and prosperity. The international negotiations are important, but they're not going to be delivering a solution anytime soon. And on both of these fronts, I think environmental groups like our own are still adjusting to the new reality. I think things have changed over the past years. We're still getting our balance and figuring out how best to engage with the current situation. We won some important battles over the past few years, but in many cases things are sliding backwards as well. So it's a good opportunity for some stock taking to look at what's worked well and what we can do better. And a lot of my reflections have led me to, well, sweet, but things that would be really good for us to do together. So I guess the first reflection that I had, I'm sorry if a lot of these will seem quite obvious, but climate change is not a quick fix. It's a ridiculously, overwhelmingly large problem that will require decades of sustained action for us to resolve. We are in this for the long haul, and we need to have broad engagement in order to solve this. I don't need to go into detail, but if we're going to prevent the worst impacts of climate change, it's going to take nothing short of a complete transformation of our global energy system. And this is stating the obvious, but this is clearly not an issue we can solve just by getting a few of the right policies in place and working with decision makers. Obviously, it's going to require a major societal shift, and to achieve that, we can't take public attention and citizen engagement for granted. We need to build it. So a few years ago, as I mentioned, this was a top-of-mind issue. You had politicians like the Environment Minister then, John Baird, talking about how we need to get tough on polluters, and now it's really taking the back seat. So we need to figure out how to get people engaged, how to get this back on the radar in a lasting way, so that we can achieve the change that we need. Now that's a tough balance. We need to show some progress so that people understand what's possible. We also need people working on the bigger picture so that we understand where all this is headed, and it has to be somewhere that people want to go. So that really requires a diversity of approaches built for long-term success. An example of this in Ontario would be work on the Green Energy Act. I think we've made some great progress getting that in place, but there have been certainly some bumps along the way, especially in rural Ontario, and there's a real need for continued engagement and building a broader societal vision for sustainable energy. I think we managed to get the policy win, but we didn't do nearly enough on follow-up, and we have to do both to succeed. So that's one way of highlighting how we really need to focus on short-term stuff, long-term stuff, as well as having broader coalitions. So that would lead to my second point, which is coalitions are extremely important, both for making sure that groups can tackle these different parts of the problem, but also because different groups can reach different audiences in ways that matter to them. And it's crucially important for us to meet people where they're at. Because climate change isn't just an environmental issue, it's a health issue, a justice issue, and as Willard pointed out so well, it's a moral issue. It's going to impact our children, our jobs, and our pocketbooks as much as our shorelines and ice caps. So getting from broad awareness to engagement and action is a jump that requires us to connect the problem with people's values and motivations. So some examples of where that's been effective, where they haven't just been environmental issues, is the coal phase out in Ontario. I think that really took off once you got health groups involved and you had doctors and nurses talking about the impact on our health. You had studies showing about the costs to our healthcare system. And then that suddenly became something that everyone could get on board with. And that is now one of the biggest greenhouse gas reduction programs in North America, and something that enjoys all parties' support, which is very important. Another great example, I think, is the work that groups are doing on the pipeline in northern BC. Different groups are framing that in ways that matter to people, talking about coastal economies at risk, pristine wilderness, First Nations rights, and oil sands expansion. Each group is able to speak to their audience in the way that matters most to them. But working together, they're able to make sure that they still have a collective direction. So another reason that's important is facts are only part of the solution. We're increasingly learning that clearly more scientific facts about climate change isn't going to be changing minds about the risks or the need for people to act. I think we need to understand that people learn as much from their peers and their communities as they do from carefully considering reports. So that really speaks to the importance of community outreach, being able to change people's minds by talking to our peers. Try to speed things up here. Lastly, it's important to be strategic, trying to think about the end you want to achieve and then how you get there when you're setting out to design a campaign. I'll leave it at that. So I quickly want to talk about a couple opportunities that I see for faith groups and environmental groups to work together over the coming year or so. As I said before, it's ultimately something that we all really need to be a part of, and the environmental community really needs to work together with the faith community. So the three strategic opportunities that came to my mind were, firstly, as Willard mentioned, the UN climate negotiations. They're starting actually on Monday in Doha. And it's a great chance to get engaged and to engage others. There are big questions about Canada's role in the world, our moral responsibility to act, and the connection between climate change, poverty, and global development. And faith groups have been historically involved in this. There was the Interfaith Call last year. That was a great statement from leaders. And the Canadian Council of Churches this year sent a great letter to Minister Kent. So these are really important ways of showing politicians that the faith community is engaged and expecting them to act. But there are also good opportunities to spark discussions within your congregations and share your views and actions with leadership. Secondly, communicating the moral imperative. I think this is something that we need the most help with. Environmental groups we can speak to our own constituencies in a certain way, but really it's faith communities that have ownership of the moral imperative, I think. absolutely the best communicators about what really matters to people. 2013 is going to be another year with a lot of facts and scary new information about climate change. We'll have the next round of intergovernmental panel reports come out, more scientific assessments. For most normal people, this will just be background noise, and it won't matter to them. It'll be either too abstract or perhaps too frightening to really sink in. They need to hear about it from you. I think we need more engagement from friends and colleagues to start changing minds that way. Reach out in your communities, foster dialogue, and help us build the understanding of why this matters, because I think that's something that the environmental community has really not been too successful with lately. And of course, if you feel comfortable with it, talk to your elected officials. It's really important for them to understand that this matters to you. And lastly, I think another extremely helpful thing would be help build that positive vision, like Willard was saying, with the importance of creating hope. I think groups are beginning to start grappling with what's at the end of the tunnel. What is the vision for a sustainable Canada? If we succeed with all this, what's it going to look like? And creating vision that will draw people towards action. So we're just starting to work on this, and the more voices, the better. Everybody needs to feel ownership of where we're going. So this is a tremendous opportunity, I think, for faith communities to involve and be part of this discussion. So one concrete example would be Tides Canada. They're working on an initiative called Clean Energy Canada, trying to build this consensus, turning it around, getting people involved, getting people signing on. So initiatives like that, being part of that, I think would be extremely important. So I'll leave it at that. I'm happy to be part of today and engage with everyone.